Welcome to our call. In 2010, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation pledged $10 billion over the next decade to research and develop vaccines and to deliver them to the world's poorest countries. As that decade has now closed, here we are, and how farsighted that announcement seems to us now. Welcome to the Philanthropy Roundtable's webinar series. I'm Anna Bob, the Health Program Director at the Roundtable. And we are joined today by a colleague from the Gates Foundation who was in fact at the foundation when the call for the Decade on Vaccines was made. And now she is among the many at the foundation who are leading our philanthropic fight against COVID-19. We have about 30 minutes on our call today to learn from our guest. This is going to be an interactive call. Please join in by asking your questions. We ask you to use the Zoom's Q&A function, and it's at the bottom right hand of your screen. Ask your questions at any time they occur to you, and we're going to get to as many of your questions as we can. Before we get to our interview, please let me tell you a little bit more about our guest. Jennifer Alkern is the Deputy Director for Philanthropic Partnerships and Gates Philanthropy Partners. Among her accomplishments is developing and launching the Gates Philanthropy Partners, the public charity affiliated with the Gates Foundation, which bundles philanthropic investments to achieve the foundation's strategic vision. She leads a team that develops partnerships with philanthropists, foundations, and other institutions to achieve this goal. Since 2008, her group has helped mobilize $2 billion in philanthropic investment. In addition to this, she just was talking to us about the fact that she lives with her husband, who is a curator at Paul Allen's Living Computers Museum, as well as her son, who loves Legos, and her 2 greyhounds. Jen, we have a very good group of philanthropists on our call with us today, and I think I can speak for all of us in saying how excited we are to hear from you firsthand about the foundation's work.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So let's start with Gates Philanthropy Partners. I think this is kind of one of your babies at the foundation. Can you tell us how you got it started?
Yeah, so Gates Philanthropy Partners grew out of really Warren Buffett making his commitment to the foundation. And when he did that, we were amazed because others started sending checks to the foundation unsolicited. And over 10 years, we received about $32 million in donations. And Bill and Melinda at that time they were astounded. And Bill Sr., Bill's dad, was like, we need to do something. We need to be able to tell people what we're doing with their funding. And so we decided to start the 501c3 public charity in order to accept that funding and then report back to individuals who are giving, anywhere from $5 to $1 million or more about what we're doing with their donation. And really, it's because we're doing it as partners. And so we always say that our donors are the partners in Gates Philanthropy Partners.
That's wonderful. So how much have you raised so far for Gates Philanthropy Partners?
It's a really good question. I have it a little bit dissected in my head, but I would say we're probably at about 225 million. In the 5 years, but most of it, to be honest, has come from COVID-19 donations and primarily for the Therapeutics Accelerator.
That's true. In the last 2 months, you've just seen a huge increase in funding.
Yeah, the last 2 months, we've received more donations than we did in all of 2019.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's astounding. The generosity is just amazing.
Yeah. So speaking of COVID-20, speaking of COVID-19, over the past 2 months, what do you think are some of the best successes, that we've had in philanthropy so far?
I think the fact that philanthropy and philanthropists acted so quickly. Mm-hmm. I mean, it just so much funding came so quickly, and like such a response of, getting it out the door as fast as they could, often with no strings attached. So general operating support grants, just giving what was needed at the moment. It's just been astounding. And I think right before our call, I was looking at the numbers for, we love data at the Gates Foundation, the numbers for global commitments just for COVID-19 right now, and it's about $10.6 billion according to Candid. And, $1 billion of that came from China within, really January, February, and early March. And so 1/10 of, that funding coming from one country is just incredible.
You've had $10.6 billion just for COVID, just in the last 2 months. You've had that all coming in.
That's all globally.
Yeah.
So it's incredible, just the massive generosity. So I would say that to me is just at this moment, kind of in our history, to see that outpouring and knowing that philanthropy, it moves so much more quickly, and so it can help that many more people because it moved that quickly. And then, I would say the other success, in my mind, has been just how quickly research and development is moving. It's just, I don't think that, I know at the foundation, we've never seen things move this quickly, from discovery to clinical trials. And our hope is that they can move just as quickly from clinical trials into manufacturing and then get on the ground. But it's been astonishing to see that happening, and how well pharmaceutical companies are working with nonprofits and universities. It's been such a positive, reaffirming thing.
Yes, I mean, these are sometimes these kind of fault lines that are set and stakes that are set in the ground, and all of a sudden everybody is kind of rowing in the same direction. And so tell us a little bit, just help break down we have about 66 people on the phone call. There's probably a range of experience with clinical trials and with these concepts. Help break down for the group kind of where philanthropy fits into this whole discovery cycle, if you will.
Yeah. Well, I think philanthropy fits in everywhere, and I think that's probably the most important message. Is so often without philanthropy, things wouldn't even start. So if you think of very upstream kind of bench discovery, the earliest the earliest research that's being done, often that just takes a little bit of funding to start. And then if there is something feasible there, then again, it's just a little bit of funding to get it through, to understand if there is a viability for it to go through a clinical trial. And then once you get into clinical trials, the funding need becomes much higher. But all along that spectrum, philanthropic capital often is the thing that comes in and helps it move more quickly. And then, we think at the foundation, we think about that whole spectrum of things, but then we think about what happens once it's, manufactured. How do you get it out? And for us, we think about it in terms of how do you get it to kind of the poorest countries in the world that may not be able to afford to purchase it on their own.
Absolutely. Well, so you just cover the whole spectrum, I think, in what you do, and we talk about kind of philanthropy moving quickly, but I mean, of course, this outpouring that you've received, that your foundation has received, is also sort of a confidence that people have that you are going to understand this process and know how to invest at every kind of step along that cycle. It's the same in our family. We say, if it's good enough for Warren Buffett, we think it's a good, we think it's a good investment. I think there's a lot of philanthropists that sort of feel that way. But, So I'll just, let's kind of break this down a little more. Let's talk a
Yeah.
little bit about the various, things we think we can do for in COVID, and it's really vaccines, testing, as well as therapeutics. And I really want to
Correct.
talk a lot about your therapeutics, but I
Yeah.
know people are very interested in the vaccine as well. There's 10 COVID vaccines currently undergoing human trials. This is according to World Health. There's 114 others in preclinical. And there is already over 250 therapies potentially, according to the New York Times. So again, there's sort of all of this possibility. We know that only 10% that go to clinical trial get through. How does philanthropy kind of help bring the best of these to the public?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think again, like philanthropy can come in at different points, but I think is in particular for COVID, the fact that philanthropic dollars were the first to the table
Hmm.
to move things to really help universities and others start to, like in our case, start to actually go through existing drugs and therapies to understand what's there and could it be repurposed for COVID. And
Perfect.
so without philanthropic dollars, that wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
But I think in particular right now, the funding is needed to get as many things through these trials as possible, because
Yeah.
we need to get to the handful at the end of that process that
Right.
are actually going to make the difference. And it takes funding, and it takes funding immediately to be able to do that.
And
And
willingness to fail. Like, this is the point that Bill
oh,
Gates made a lot. Like, we may not get them
risk
all through.
capital.
We have to kind of support all of these strategies at once right now. And it's different than business is done as usual.
It is. And I mean, the interesting thing about research and development is that even when you fail, you learn something. So we may not learn it, it may not be for COVID-19, but it might be for another coronavirus. And
Mhm.
so like we're thinking about, all of the things that we will learn from these vaccines will go into our thinking for influenza vaccines, for what could be a pan-coronavirus vaccine. So even if it fails, and at least we've knocked one thing off that could be useful for something else, but it then starts to limit, then the other things that will go through the trials. And so it's all beneficial. And that I would say you have to be okay with some risk, and you have to be patient, because not everything is going to come out the other end. But it's all really important work. And the faster we move, the quicker we can get to a drug or therapy that can, prevent or cure COVID, and to a vaccine.
Absolutely. Um, so I do have a question from Debbie Gatte, who's with the Snyder Foundation. She said, "Hi, thanks so much to the Gates Foundation for the foresight and leadership on the COVID vaccine front. She mentioned that it can be discouraging when the foundation's criticized for its good work, because if it's ever seen as taking over a function of government. How do you deal with that? And how can we, as a philanthropic community, help with this?"
Oh, wow. Thank you so much for that question. We see ourselves as a partner to government and a partner to the private sector. We feel like we're all in this together. We're all part of a process. And so, we hear the criticism. We definitely hear the criticism, but we also understand what role we can play. And sometimes that's nudging a little bit, and sometimes it's just being supportive and helping with the expertise or whatever it is that we have that can help. Um, but ultimately, it's about helping people on the ground. And we say, our goal is to make sure that people can have a healthy and productive life, and it doesn't matter where they live. They should have that ability and that right. And so that's our North Star. We're constantly looking at that, no matter what's being said around us.
Absolutely. Well, and there's a follow-up question here from Debbie, just which is that there's word from pharma and really all through the medical community, and we've talked about this, and you actually mentioned in your opening remarks that there's just been also this kind of really unprecedented time of cooperation between these various entrenched actors within the sector. And I know that you know your boss is right in the middle of all those strategic conversations, and I know and I'm wondering kind of if you can tell us a little bit about that from your point of
Yeah.
view.
Well, I think the thing is that we realize it takes all different types of organizations and people and institutions to get things done. So we have been working with pharmaceutical companies nearly since the beginning of the foundation 20 years ago. And even if we don't agree all the time with, how they might price something for a lower middle income country, we still have to have those relationships and we have to have that respect for one another. And so I think because we've done that and we've had something that we call the CEO Roundtable, which brings together pharmaceutical companies with the foundation and other nonprofits to really talk about what can we be doing for the poorest populations and how can we work better together. And that's been happening for about 8 or 9 years now. Um, and that relationship building is just so critical. And it's the same with governments, it's the same with other private sector organizations. And we find a mutual understanding, and it allows us in a time like this to all find ways to work together.
That's true. So I'm just going to bring it back to some of these amazing initiatives you guys have done at Gates. There's a group you founded in 2017, I believe, called the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations. You called CP.
Yeah.
And of course, this is now your catalyst for the companies working on vaccines. This, of course, I think to date, this fund has leveraged, hundreds of millions of dollars. Can you tell us more about how this group works and how it's working in the time of COVID?
Yeah. So CEPI comes from what we learned during the 2013-14 West Africa Ebola outbreak. And what we saw was this desperate need for a drug, a treatment, a diagnostic, and a vaccine. And we couldn't get, the world couldn't coordinate well enough to get something done quickly. And so many people died unnecessarily. And the bottlenecks were really time and coordination. And those are things that we should be able to overcome. And so with Welcome Trust, we helped found CEPI with this idea of let's try this with vaccines. Let's make sure that we have one institution that can be kind of the clearinghouse for viable possible vaccines and that can get them through quickly. And they'll have in place global access clauses to ensure that the vaccines will, be available to low and middle income countries at, low cost, high scale. And that was really the hypothesis behind CEPI, and we'll see it prove out. I think this is the best use case we could possibly have for it. And so we've seen that they've been able to mobilize really quickly, and they have I think right now it's 8 vaccines that have the potential to go through clinical trials. And so they're testing that viability, and then they'll start to move them through trials. And what's great about CEPI is it's able to take funding from sovereign governments, and it's able to take funding from the philanthropic sector. And so together, that funding is helping to push through candidates that hopefully will come out the other side and have the kind of the pre-qualification they need from the World Health Organization, and with kind of the requirements of being low cost and being able to be manufactured at a scale that makes them available to the highest number of people.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean that you have this 3-year ramp that you've had for this COVID pandemic, which is just a great position, to be in when we're hit by this.
Yeah, well, and I think that was always our thought was we hope we never go through a pandemic, but it's probably likely that we're going to see something close to it in our lifetimes. And so let's be prepared for that. And so, CEPI was one of those investments. Another was Resolve to Save Lives, which has been working with different governments across Africa and Asia to really help them be prepared for a pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And just having protocols in place and knowing what to do can make all the difference when something like this hits.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to just tell our guests. I did ask Jennifer if I can ask this next question, but I'm going to ask this question. The foundation made news when you announced you would be supporting the development of factories to test multiple vaccine candidates simultaneously. Can you tell us more about this?
Yes. So I think Bill may have misspoken on Trevor Noah, on the Trevor Noah show. And, we we will certainly be putting money into building manufacturing capacity. We know that in order for a vaccine to be available as soon as it's ready, manufacturing capacity has to be out there right now. And we have to be building it right now. But the problem is we don't know which vaccine is going to be the right one. And so you have to build factories or manufacturing capability that can cover multiple types of vaccines that may come out. And so, we're looking at this thinking, it's probably about $1 billion or more to have capacity ready, but only 1/3 of that, only 1/3 of what we build will actually end up going into use. And so it's a risky proposition. We don't want to be in it alone. And we won't be in it alone. We'll be looking and working with partners across the world to do this. But I think what Bill meant to say was really that this is going to be needed, and we may not use it all, but we need to have it there and ready for whatever comes out of the vaccine trials.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean, they're saying the word I heard was pandemic speed. We need to work, or I guess the White House says warp speed, but pandemic speed is what the National Academy says. So this is one of the strategies for getting ahead of it and having, like just really, testing all these options, simultaneously and understanding this is an unprecedented situation. So I think, I think it was great he, put that strategy forward. We have another question I want to, coming over the chat. So I've had trouble. Let me see if I can find it. So Macy Hill asked, what does the funding model look like when you work with a pharmaceutical company and a research institutions at a scale this large?
It's a really good question. It can look different in different situations. So it really depends on the partnership. But often for the foundation, we're using grant dollars and philanthropic dollars across the board. There are sometimes that we will use kind of our balance sheet to do what we call like a volume guarantee or an advanced market guarantee. So we try to get creative with how we work. So we might be working with a pharmaceutical company and say, great, if you can manufacture it at this scale, we'll guarantee that the world will buy this much. And if they don't, we'll pay you back. And then, we do have grants or contracts often with pharmaceutical companies or other product development partners to really move these things through, especially if we think that they're going to be good solutions or truly viable solutions. So whatever expedites the process.
And she also asked, are you working in collaboration with private funders? And yes, that's absolutely what you're doing with the philanthropy partners, and you're getting all of these contributions and
yeah, so we do. And whether it comes through Gates Philanthropy Partners or it goes directly to CEPI or one of our other partners, we do. We feel like if we have some kind of expertise that we can share and that others can leverage, we are so open to that. And that's kind of been our philosophy for I've been at the foundation for about 12 years. So since the beginning, this is our 20th anniversary. The idea has always been, if we have expertise, we should share it.
Mhm.
And so in this case, we felt that there was absolutely no need for us to hold on to any of this, whatever we could be doing. So you'll see we are, all of our teams are on the phone or available almost 24/7 these days, ready to, talk with people about the work that we're doing and the other pieces of work that we may not be doing, but that we know need to be funded. And so we can act as that connector too. It's so important that we're all in this together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. We so appreciate that. So just moving a little away from vaccines, we're super intrigued by this $5 million partnership you developed in Seattle. That's your at-home testing partner, and you developed a partnership with your academic medical centers, as well as Amazon, I believe, to pick up tests from people at their homes and then test them at these academic research centers. Tell us about that. What's going on with that?
Yeah, so this was really fortuitous. Both the Gates Foundation and Bill's private office, Gates Ventures, had put some funding into what was called, or what is called, the Seattle Flu Study. And so Seattle Flu Study is doing testing for flu, trying to understand how it moved around the city. And then it started doing testing for COVID. And it found the first case in Seattle in January. It wasn't approved to test for COVID, but they were doing it. And as soon as they realized that they could then take what they had been doing for flu and do it for COVID, they started working with the FDA and the CDC to try to get this model approved. And so it's called the swab and send model. And what you do is, if you have symptoms, you go onto a platform, you provide your information. The same day a kit is delivered to your door, they text you when it gets there, you have a swab, and you do the swab yourself. It's one that just kind of goes like very shallow in your nose. It's not the one that's not, totally uncomfortable and would be really hard to do yourself. But you do this, you package it back up, you text and say, okay, I'm ready. They come and pick it up, and within 3 to 4 days, you have your response. Either if you're positive, University of Washington gives you a call and starts to do the contact tracing. And if you're negative, you log on to a website just to verify. We did run into some troubles with the swabs. We had to, because of a shortage of materials, we had to use a different kind of swab, which is now getting reapproved by the FDA. So the program has paused for a little bit, but what's really great is we're working with other organizations and other cities who are replicating this.
Yeah.
So it's happening in San Francisco, Boston. There's a group that's starting to look into it in Chicago, and then also in Texas.
Okay, that's and often you find an anchor philanthropist probably in these various locations, to anchor the project. So this would be an opportunity for some of our philanthropists who want to improve testing.
Absolutely, and it really, like, being able to be that link between the academic institution and other organizations, and sometimes even the lab companies, it becomes that philanthropists and their team become a true hub of making that happen. And the potential is to be able to test up to 10,000 people a day, which, as the economies start to reopen and cities and states start to reopen, it's going to become incredibly important.
Yes, it's extremely strategic. Okay, so we're already kind of hitting our time mark, but I don't want to, I really want to make sure we save what's kind of some of the best for last. I mean, tell us about, just like you did for vaccines, please tell us about your accelerator.
Great. Yeah, thank you
Yeah.
for asking. So the Therapeutics Accelerator, very similar to CEPI,
Yep.
came out of everything we learned from the West Africa Ebola crisis.
Mhm.
You know, things need to move more quickly and they need to be coordinated. And so in early February, we started pulling together partners to say, okay, we don't have an institution that can do what CEPI is doing for vaccines, but can do it for drugs and therapeutics or for diagnostics.
Mhm.
We need to create it. And so within weeks, we literally had a virtual organization set up
Mhm.
um, to be able to come together, bring scientists together, and these groups are going through the pharmaceutical companies' libraries
Mhm.
and looking at what they have available that can be repurposed or even made into a compound
Mhm.
that can treat or even cure COVID-19. And the goal is to have something out of clinical trials and into manufacturing by the end of the year and into the market early next year.
Mhm.
And so right now we have about, I think it's about 5 different things in clinical trials. So we have sites set up, we have all the training going, and we've just moved diagnostics into the accelerator as well, just with this recognition that you need to test and then you need to treat. And
Mhm.
so we've had, we have a whole bunch of other things that are ready to start going through clinical trials. And we are, we believe it'll take about $500 million to put
Mhm.
most of these through trials and get some really good things coming out the other end. We are at about $300 million now. And so we're just spending it and getting things through trials because we know until there's a vaccine, we have to have a treatment. And particularly for frontline healthcare workers, and for others, just even to have the pre-exposure, having something for pre-exposure is just going to be so critical until we have a vaccine that's ready and can be delivered.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Well, we know there's a lot of pressure on you, and we know that you're having to react, hour by hour and change, adapt to constantly changing information. We're with, we're thinking about you, we're thinking about your staff and all of that.
Thank
You are
you.
on the front lines as well. So I don't want to close our call without letting our group know if they want to get more involved with you, what's the way that they can best reach out to your group, and in the way that's going to be least disruptive to very busy people.
Yeah, well, consider me and my team the front door to the foundation. And so, shoot me an email, give me a call, and we will connect you with the right people and, make sure that we can share, what we know and who we know are great partners to be working with. And to be honest, we love to do this.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter if we're exhausted or have circles under our eyes. This is what we're here to do, and we feel like we're serving not only the end recipients, but also others who are ready to be involved. And so we're just honored to be able to help.
Well, Jen, thank you so. I mean, I feel like we could go on for forever, but I know you're busy, so we just want to thank you so much for your time and everything you're doing, and
Thank you.
we hope you
Yeah.
come back on and talk about more progress soon.
Oh, I hope so. I would love to. Thank you.
Thank you.